But if you're on Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, or Stitcher, you don't have to go anywhere because we're kind of just moving right along into our next topic. And it's kind of this whole podcast, which is interesting for a podcast. Usually it's very jump cutty if you're on YouTube, and there's still going to be jump cuts. But this whole podcast is very one full topic that has like 3 components to it throughout. And with this one, we focused on Alabama. I want to focus on another team that could be sneaking their way back into a playoff berth. And I want to ask you, Brandon, is USC still alive? Do they still have a chance to make the playoffs?
Yeah, they do. I mean, at this point, there's about 8 teams fighting for 4 spots. Only 4 get them, but there's 8 teams, at least 8 teams alive. USC is one of those teams alive. And why are they still alive? Well, Notre Dame, a team that beat them 49-14, as I'm sure everyone will remember, certainly USC fans and Notre Dame fans. But now that loss
doesn't look
lessens
that bad.
a little bit. Fans aren't as mad anymore because they needed Notre Dame to drop at least 2 of the 3 games, Miami, Navy, and Stanford. And what did Notre Dame do? They dropped just that. 2 of the 3 to Miami and then Stanford. So that happens.
And they were blew out in the one. They were blew out against Miami, and I don't think they were winning against Stanford, but I don't think it was really close.
USC, they would need 2 lost champions in the other Power 5 conferences, and they possibly could. If Auburn wins, there you go. If Penn State wins, there you go. That's about it. Well, no. If TCU wins, there you go.
You mean Ohio State.
Is that what I said?
You said Penn State. Ohio State's playing Wisconsin.
What in the hell is wrong with me today? I am just thinking of all these teams in my head, and I meant to say Ohio State. But
they need TCU, Ohio State, and Auburn, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now, that could happen. I mean, that could happen. USC is not dead. I actually think they're far from dead. On the same token, I think they're far from getting in, but they're like right in the middle. It doesn't make sense to say that they're far from both, but they're alive. They are alive. I think that right now, they're a team that you can say they're not necessarily close, because I wouldn't put them in the top 6, but they're not at number 10 either.
I'm going to take you through sort of, because they need that to happen. But if that happens, here's what goes on in my head. Auburn's automatically in. The ACC champions are automatically in. I just got to keep saying that to cement that into fact. Clemson fans would also get mad if I didn't bring up how many times the ACC champion would be in if they win. But there's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 resumes that I think USC has to get through after they beat Stanford. And the first one to be, I've kind of ranked them in order of how I see them if, let's say, Ohio State, TCU, and Auburn all win. The first one is Wisconsin. We're going to talk about them in a little bit in the third segment, but their only loss of the year would be to Ohio State. However, the thing I would look at is, you get beat Iowa, you get beat Michigan. Those are lower teams, but you've got this USC team would have had 2 ranked wins over Stanford. You have a 22 win over Arizona, and your 2 losses were to ranked opponents. So I would say, in my mind, I'm sorry, Wisconsin fans, your record's impressive. Yes, you lost to Ohio State. I might favor a conference champion, and that might be the deal, like at the end of it, like conference championship, you go on. Although they have 2 losses, their 2 losses were to ranked opponents, and they have 3 ranked wins where your ranked wins just don't stand up the exact same to me. You have 2 ranked wins and a ranked loss, and out of conference, you played BYU, Florida Atlantic, and Utah State, where the Trojans played Texas, went to double overtime with them, went out and played a Notre Dame. You got to reward a team for going out and playing a conference opponent like that, even though it's a big rivalry game. The next one, Oklahoma. This one would be interesting because they would both be 2-loss teams, and you would look at it, and the big losses would be Iowa State, who was unranked at the time. I think that one a little at the time looked bad. Iowa State, though, a better team now than we thought they were right then. They've been climbing the ladder. But looking at it, you beat TCU, you beat Oklahoma State, you got a big win over Ohio State. Oklahoma might be one where this might be where the road stops for the Trojans. But let's say they go on. Then they got to beat TCU's resume, where I think this is, you beat number 6, you beat number 23, but you lost to Oklahoma. You beat Oklahoma, but you lost to them before, and you lost to Iowa State. If they get through that, then they got to go through Alabama's resume. Then they got to go through Ohio State's resume. In the end, I think as high as they will get is it'll be them, Ohio State. And I might have to pick Ohio State to get that 4th spot over a Trojan team.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, they're alive, but it's really tough. It's going to be really tough. When you take a look at this, they beat Stanford, who at the time was number 14, and they beat Arizona, who at the time was number 22. But they lost to Washington, WashU, number 16 at the time, and then they got spanked by Notre Dame. On the road, I get it, but you got spanked. So that's just not very good. So there's your compilation of your ranked teams, at the time. I think that the teams in front of them have a better resume in terms of the people they played and the ranking of those people, how they played against them, how they fared against them. I think one of the things, though, for now kind of going away from the Trojans, just in a sense to talk about why this team, whether they win, whether they lose, well, if they lose, it's over for them. But even if they win, Ohio State, and we cannot forget that they
lost to Iowa,
pummeled by an unranked Iowa team. So could that help USC? Could that help USC? And people look at that and go, okay, yes, a 2-loss team and a 2-loss team, but there was no one on here that USC lost to that wasn't ranked at the time. There's no one that they, outside of at the time ranked teams, that they lost to or got beat badly by. You can go and look and say, oh, man, they got blown out by Notre Dame. They did. At the time, Notre Dame was number 13, trending upwards. And at the time, maybe Iowa was trending upwards, but they weren't in the top 25. They were certainly not expected to, one, lose to Ohio State, to beat Ohio State, rather, and let's say if they did, maybe by 3 points, maybe by a point. No. They kicked their butt. So that's where if you put those two together and you go, okay, now let's look at these 2-loss teams that could possibly be in the playoffs. I think that you bounce USC over Ohio State in that sense.
Well, and that's the thing that, I was going to bring up too, was if you're going to chastise Oklahoma, let's say Oklahoma loses to TCU. If you would chastise Oklahoma for losing to losing to a Iowa State, then you've got to do the same thing for the Buckeyes losing to the way they did to Iowa. However, here's how I think, plain and simple, how it boils down. Looking at, like I said, with Wisconsin, the thing that if they don't win, they're out to me. The reason why is the only 2 ranked teams you played, Iowa and Michigan. Michigan was a lot more hyped up at the beginning of the year, so people by the end of the year were very low on Michigan. Iowa was only ranked that high because they had beaten, I want to say, that was the next week. Yeah, the exact next week after they had beaten Ohio State. You didn't play anyone else. So I would say I'll give it to USC, who, you have 2 losses, but they're against ranked opponents, and you're 3-2 against ranked opponents, barring you win the Pac-12 title. The thing with the Big Ten is interesting. Oklahoma yes, you're 3-1 against ranked opponents, but that loss to Iowa State, an unranked Iowa State team, yeah, I know it was only 7 points, but how does that hurt you? Because USC, all of their losses have been ranked opponents, and Notre Dame, that's the big thing. How they are now compared to where they were, is that going to hurt? Washington State isn't at number 16 anymore. They are now lesser than what we thought at the beginning of the year. And then even with TCU, like your losses were to Oklahoma and Iowa State. If you beat Oklahoma again, how much is that going to help you? And the thing that it gets to, Alabama, we've already talked about. Who have they played? Only playoff team they played was Auburn. The thing that I think, and this will stop USC dead in the tracks, and why I think the heartbeats faint, like it's boom, boom, boom. It's like USC right now to me is that team where it's like, just pull the plug.
They're on life support.
Just pull the plug.
Support.
Like you're sitting there going like, USC's the kind of team where you're sitting there, and I know this has gone to a morbid place, but just ride with me a little bit. But they're that team where you're sitting there and you're having the discussion of like, is this really a life? Is this a life you want to live right now, USC? Like, that is what I'm looking at, because at the end, and Ohio State is where this all comes back to with this discussion to me, is yes, Ohio State lost to Iowa, and it's a bad loss just like the Iowa State one in this scenario is to Oklahoma, but how many good teams did they play? Michigan State was a 12th ranked team. Penn State number 2. They would have beaten Wisconsin, who's a top 5 team, probably even top 4 at this point, barring what the committee does on Tuesday as we record this on Monday. And then they did go out of conference. And you have to at least, I'm going to reward you the same as I rewarded USC for going out and playing Notre Dame. I got to do the same for Ohio State just for scheduling the game against Oklahoma, because most people, Nick Saban, wouldn't do that.
No, I think it's exactly true. And I mean, how many times, Ricky, this is a question that kind of goes off of USC, but how many times is it going to take a coach to see other teams go out, schedule these difficult opponents out of conference, and then whether you win, whether you lose. Ohio State last year beat Oklahoma. This year couldn't do it, but they still scheduled them. And that's going to speak volumes to you, because if you're in this position, which you always hope you're not, but if you're in this position and someone's looking through your schedule going, okay, this is a loss. Well, that's not a bad loss. You played a really good team at the time. And look at Oklahoma right now. How many times is that going to take for other coaches to follow suit and say, you know what, we can't just schedule Mercer. You know, we have got to schedule other teams outside of that.
Hey, man, that was a good 56-0 win, though.
Yeah, I'm sure it was very uplifting for the players, but what did it do for the week after? I think that is one of those questions that are out there that have other people kind of scratching their heads going, yeah, how long is it going to take? Why are they scheduling these cupcake teams instead of trying to actually go out there and schedule at least someone a little bit more difficult? I think that it's only going to help your team, your program in the long run, because if you're a good team, you'll beat them.
And I mean, the one thing, and I know this, like you said, getting a little bit away from USC, but like I look at the Alabama schedule from last year, they were aided by with what the conference was, and that's what a lot of this is this year. Which conferences are the most loaded conferences? SEC, not as loaded this year. Tennessee's been really bad. Ole Miss, we haven't even mentioned them all year this year after the Hugh Freeze firing. Haven't even mentioned Ole Miss this year. Mississippi State hasn't been anything since they lost Dak Prescott. You have Florida. The only reason we're talking about them is they're down and out. Even look at the ACC. The only big teams we were talking about from there, they were probably, to me, the second loaded conference this year. They had Clemson, who we talked about. They have Miami, who we've talked about. Louisville early in the year, NC State early in the year. These were teams that we were coming back talking about each week because they were highly ranked and they were on runs. To me, the best two conferences in football this year have been the Big 12 and the Big 10, with teams and ranked teams and storylines, not like these have the most playoff teams. Because you look at the Big 12, we're talking about Oklahoma State, we're talking about Oklahoma, we're talking about TCU, then we talk about Iowa State as well after they started having a run, and then like the Big 10, talking about Penn State's, talking about Wisconsin's, talking about Ohio State's. It's where the storylines are and where those ranked teams are that helps your conference. Because then if you have more of those ranked teams in conference, you don't have to go out of conference to get those. You're fine just in conference.
Well, then you must be not receiving any of the SEC news because you have Alabama, you have Auburn, you have Georgia, you've had LSU, who went from nothing and really just, after that Troy loss, to roared back. Ended up having a great season, total, overall. After what happened at the beginning to how they ended, absolutely phenomenal. Mississippi State, they actually didn't play all that poorly. They had some tough games. They had a tough game against Georgia. They played a very, very good game against Alabama. Had a chance to win. They weren't able to. Their quarterback got hurt here in the last week. But Mississippi State's been right there as well. Florida's been terrible this year, but we've talked about them for a good part of the year as to why they've been terrible. Their coach search, Tennessee. But when you're talking, you need to speak specifically and say if you're talking about we're talking about playoff teams and storylines. Well, you have three potential playoff teams in the SEC, and you have storylines on almost every single one of these teams.
I was going to say, maybe my point got misconstrued. What I was talking about...
No, you just said it wrong.
Yeah, maybe. But what I was going with more importantly was the scheduling thing, where last year, Alabama doesn't have to schedule out of conference. You've got Tennessee ranked number 9. You've got Arkansas, good ranked team. You've got more ranked opponents in there. Look at USC this year. To me, like, they're not top of the conference, but... You had Washington State at 16. You had Arizona was a ranked game. Stanford was 14. They're going to get them again at 21. You have those ranked games in your conference. Look at Ohio State. You get Michigan State that's a ranked opponent. Everyone thought Michigan would be that, but they fell off. Penn State was a number 2 team. They don't necessarily have to go out of conference and play those big teams, but they did. And Ohio State did go out and say, yeah, we'll schedule in Oklahoma. We'll put them on the schedule. A team like USC said, yeah, we'll go out and call Notre Dame. We'll put them on the schedule. And that's what it comes down to in this, and why that's the only thing why the heartbeat is still alive for the Trojans is because they have some of those ranked wins. I think more of those ranked wins, though, are going to come from Big 12 because Oklahoma State, TCU, and Oklahoma were ranked highly this year and were ranked in the upper half of the top 25, especially when they played each other. And then you also have the Big 10 that was like that too. And that's going to be the only thing to trump the Trojans that we talked about with Alabama in the first segment and what's nearly going to hurt them because these teams that were ranked so high in the SEC last year were not ranked this year and we're firing their coaches now.
I just have to say one thing. When I was talking earlier about USC and one of the teams that they had lost to, I said at the time ranked
you said Washington.
I meant Washington State. I was thinking about that, and you said something that triggered that. And I'm like, I completely said that wrong.
It's the Cougs.
So before anyone says, well, this guy's a complete idiot.
They already have.
But at least I caught myself.
Anything else you think that we missed on USC?
Didn't miss anything. I think that USC, they're alive. But they are really hanging on by a thread.
Well, and this is where if you're on YouTube, let us know what you guys think down below. Scenarios might not favor the Trojans, but do you think there's a way in some alternate universe that they get in by beating Stanford and having some scenario? Put your tinfoil hats on. That's what I'm telling you. Put the tinfoil hats on. I want to hear what you guys have to say down below in the comment section.